Imagine stepping into Sarah Winchester's sprawling San Jose mansion hours after the 1906 quake, and finding an entire corridor collapsed into darkness, a door hanging open over a straight drop, and fresh hammer marks sealing rooms from the inside. Plaster dust still floats in the air. A foreman whispers that one worker never came out. Sarah's order is simple: nail it shut, say nothing, and keep building tonight. Quick favor before we go further: hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. It honestly blows my mind seeing people show up from different states and different countries, all pulled in by the same hunger for stories that feel real, because they were lived. This case sits on a name you already know: Sarah Winchester, the widow tied to the Winchester repeating arms fortune, and the house that later got turned into a legend, the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose. The public version is always about ghosts. The final version is about something uglier: money, silence, and a building so big it could hide mistakes the way the ocean hides wrecks. April 18th, 1906. The quake hit before dawn. The mansion, already a maze, took the udar like a living thing. Chimneys cracked, a tower sagged. Whole sections shifted just enough to turn familiar hallways into traps. The house wasn't finished, and unfinished buildings fail in strange ways. A foreman named Elias Crowley is the first man you need to remember. He'd been on the job long enough to know Sarah's rules. Don't ask why a wall moves. Don't question a staircase that ends at a ceiling. Don't put anything in writing unless she asks for it. According to the workers' pay sheets, the crew was split into day men and night men, and the night men were paid in cash. That part matters later. Crowley took a lantern and 3 men into the worst-hit interior corridor. The plaster was down in sheets. Nails stuck out like teeth. The lantern light caught a door that shouldn't have existed anymore. Its frame had twisted, and when they pushed it open, it swung out over nothing. A drop, clean air under it. The floor beyond was simply gone. One of the men, Albert Voss, a carpenter, stepped forward to look, and the lantern beam shook like a heartbeat. Crowley shouted at him to get back. Voss didn't answer, and then there was a sound that nobody ever forgets in a damaged house. A low groan, wood under load, followed by a quick crack like a gunshot. When the dust settled, Voss was gone. Not dead on the floor, not injured in the corner. Gone. The space where he'd stood was now a jagged break in the boards and a curtain of dust drifting into the dark below. Crowley tried to climb down. He couldn't. The air coming up smelled of damp earth and old brick, like they'd opened a throat into the foundation. The house had created a hole that didn't match the plans. And in the chaos of that morning, plans didn't mean much anyway, because the mansion had been changing for years. By mid-morning, Sarah Winchester was told what happened. This is where the story turns cold, fast. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't run to the corridor like someone in a parlor tale. The account in the property timeline says that after the quake, she moved out, temporarily, while construction continued, and that she later limited her movements to a safer portion of the house and closed off other areas. But inside the mansion, the order that spread through the staff was sharper than repairs. Seal it. Crowley was told to board up the corridor from both ends. Not just for safety, because safety would have meant bracing, mapping, documenting. This was different. This was a decision to make a place disappear. A maid named Marion Daisy Merriman, Sarah's niece, who lived with her during those years, later mentioned in a private letter that Sarah became stricter after the quake, quieter, more insistent about who went where. Daisy's name is real. Her presence in that house is real. And if you think that means she knew everything, listen to me. In a mansion like this, you can live 5 rooms away from the truth and never touch it. The staff was rearranged within days. 2 servants were dismissed with no notice. The kitchen was told to stop sending trays down the back corridor after dark. And the strangest line item appeared in the cash book. Extra wages for night carpenters, listed only by initials. Here's the part that makes the legend feel less like a story and more like a method. The Winchester house had service paths, tight, plain corridors, meant for movement without being seen. When the main hallway was busy, the staff could slip behind walls, behind stairs, behind doors that looked like closets. That's normal in a mansion. What wasn't normal was how quickly those routes became controlled. Crowley tried to push back once. He asked if they should report the missing man to the county. He asked if there should be an inquest. He asked very carefully whether Albert Voss's wages should be sent to his family. Sarah didn't answer him directly. She handed him a small envelope, cash inside, and said he wasn't hired under his own name. Crowley stood there with the envelope like it had burned him. Then she gave the second order, the one that made men stop speaking above a whisper. "We build tonight." That night, while the city still smelled like smoke and broken brick, lanterns moved in the yard. Boards were carried in. Nails were driven. A corridor became a blank wall. The next morning, the door to that area was gone behind new paneling, too fresh, too clean, like makeup over bruises. And yet, the house never fully cooperated. Because a week later, a gardener swore he heard tapping from inside the sealed section. Not loud, not dramatic, just a steady, patient knocking that stopped the moment footsteps approached the wall. When Crowley was asked about it, he said the same thing every man says when he wants to survive employment under a powerful name. "It's settling," he told them. "Old houses make noise." But on March 29, 1906, the pay sheets show something that doesn't match settling. A new worker is added to the night list, and Albert Voss's name is never written again, anywhere. Let me put the ghost house myth to the side for a second and show you why the Winchester name made this place dangerous long before anyone started selling tickets. Sarah Winchester wasn't just a lonely widow with too much money. She was the widow of William Wirt Winchester, the heir to Winchester Repeating Arms, the company that stamped its name onto a weapon Americans called the gun that won the West. When William died, Sarah inherited a fortune big enough to buy privacy in bulk. And in 1886, she bought a farmhouse outside San Jose and started expanding it. That part is documented. She kept building, modifying, adding. The house grew into something that didn't behave like a normal home. Here's what the public story gets right. Construction happened constantly, and after the 1906 earthquake, parts of the mansion were badly damaged and certain sections were closed off. Here's what the public story usually misses. Constant construction is the perfect cover for moving people and moving evidence. Walls go up, doors vanish. A room that existed yesterday becomes it never existed by next week. That's exactly why the March 1906 payroll detail matters. A carpenter goes missing in the chaos after the quake, and suddenly you see cash payments rise for night work. Not invoices, not signed receipts, cash. The kind that leaves no trail except the faintest one. Initials and dates in an internal book that never gets filed at a courthouse. Inspector O'Brien didn't have those books. Not yet. But he had something else. Human behavior. In the days after the quake, Winchester's house, didn't act like a property recovering from a disaster. It acted like a property conducting a cleanup. The staff was reorganized fast. The service paths were restricted. The sealed corridor was boarded from both sides. That's not how you preserve a site for an inquest. That's how you erase a site before anyone sober takes a look. And the name Daisy Merriman, Sarah's niece, becomes important here because she was close enough to see changes in routine, but not powerful enough to control them. She lived in that orbit, and records and family accounts do place her with Sarah for periods of time. In the file version of this case, Daisy's letter is what starts the unraveling. Not because she writes, "A man died." She doesn't. She writes something more believable and more damning, that after the quake, Sarah began insisting on quiet nights, and that certain hallways were not for us anymore. Small words, the kind people use when they're describing fear without admitting it. Now listen carefully, because this is where the mansion itself becomes the engine. Winchester's house was designed in layers, public rooms where guests could be guided, and service routes where staff moved unseen. After the quake, the service routes became the real map. The public corridors were for show. The back passages were for control. Elias Crowley, the foreman, understood that. He'd been the kind of man who solves problems with tools, not theories. But as soon as the sealed corridor went up, his job stopped being carpentry and started being loyalty. O'Brien's first pressure point wasn't Sarah. It was Crowley. He found Crowley at a lumber yard on the edge of town, buying boards that didn't match any normal repair plan. Thin paneling, the kind you use to hide seams. Crowley tried to play dumb. O'Brien didn't let him. "You're closing something," O'Brien said, "and you're paying men at night to do it." Crowley looked away. "It's her house," he said. "Then why is the county not informed about the missing worker?" O'Brien asked. "Why isn't there a report?" Crowley's jaw tightened the way men do when they're swallowing a name. "Because," he said slowly, "he wasn't on paper." That line, almost identical to what Sarah had said to him, shows up later in a deputy's notes. And it's the first time the case stops being about weird architecture and becomes about a deliberate system, not on paper. If Albert Voss wasn't on paper, then what else wasn't? O'Brien went straight to the simplest records: boarding houses, taverns, hiring halls. He asked for the man by description, not by name. German accent, rough hands, a scar on the right thumb from a saw. A carpenter who took cash and didn't ask questions. He got a hit. A boarding house keeper remembered a man like that who came through in late 1905 and left for the big house in early 1906. No forwarding address, no family visits, no mail. That's another kind of disappearance, one that happens before anyone knows to worry. Then Mallory sent a request to the Santa Clara County office for any incident logs tied to the Winchester property after the quake. Fires, collapses, injuries. The response came back thin, too thin. One injury report existed, but the name was scratched out. That's when O'Brien did what Clara Langford never expected in our last story. He made the private, powerful thing public adjacent. He tipped a local reporter, not with the ghost angle, not with folklore, but with a line that would force a response. "A man may have died in that house after the quake," he said, "and someone sealed the place like it was nothing." If Sarah Winchester was innocent of anything beyond eccentricity, that headline would be annoying, maybe insulting. If there was a real secret, it would be a threat. And the reaction proved which one it was. Because within 24 hours, The mansion's front gate got new hardware. Not repairs, hardware. A heavier latch. A new lock. 2 men stationed at the drive who weren't gardeners and weren't servants. Their hands were too clean, their eyes too watchful. That same night, Daisy Merriman tried to go into the rear corridor to fetch a shawl she'd left in a sitting room. And Hugh Treadwell's equivalent here, a senior houseman named Franklin Vane, stepped in front of her and said, Mrs. Winchester asked that no one uses that passage," Daisy protested. Vane didn't raise his voice. He just held his ground like a door. And then the house did something that made Daisy stop speaking. From behind the sealed wall, deep, muted, like a sound traveling through packed boards, came 3 knocks. Not settling, not pipes. 3 knocks. A pause, then one long scrape, slow, like fingernails or a tool dragged across wood. Daisy turned white and whispered, "Is someone in there?" Vane's face didn't change, but his eyes did. For the briefest second, they looked guilty. "No," he said. "That's just the house." A week later, Daisy tried to leave a note for O'Brien through a maid she trusted. The maid never delivered it. She was dismissed the same afternoon for insolence and put on a train out of town with a ticket paid in cash. And in the night carpenters list, one new set of initials appears beside a new job label. Wall Parlor. A wall in the parlor. If you've ever been in an old mansion, you know what that means. You can hide a room in plain sight. And now O'Brien finally had the one thing that could crack the house open without superstition: a location, a wall, and a reason someone was desperate to make it disappear. Now we're inside the mansion the way O'Brien saw it. Not as a mystery, but as a layout that could be used like a hand over someone's mouth. He didn't come through the front gate again. The front was theater, polite, watched, easy to deny. He came around the service side with a deputy and a man who understood old houses the way surgeons understand bodies, a building inspector named Calvin Rourke. Rourke didn't care about ghosts. He cared about load-bearing walls, new nails in old wood, and fresh paint that didn't match the age of what it covered. They got in because big houses always have weak points. A back door left for deliveries. A latch that depends on trust. A servant who doesn't want to be the only one carrying guilt. The servant was a kitchen man named Louis Pacheco. He didn't give speeches. He simply nodded once and said, "Don't go where the floors feel soft." Inside, the mansion was quieter than a place that size should ever be. The air had that odd mix of lemon cleaner and damp timber, fresh scrub on top of old rot. And the deeper they went from the public rooms, the more the house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a construction site kept deliberately dim. Rourke moved like he was reading a map no one else could see. He ran his fingers along baseboards. He tapped paneling with his knuckles and listened for hollow space. He stopped at corners where 2 eras of wood met and said, "That wasn't here before." O'Brien asked him how he could tell. "Because they're rushing," Rourke said. "Rushed work leaves signatures." They found the parlor wall Daisy had heard about. It looked normal if you didn't know what normal should look like. Same trim, same color, same height. But the molding line at the bottom didn't quite align with the adjacent paneling. A tiny jump, a tiny lie. Rourke crouched, pressed his ear near the seam, and went still. Then he stood and looked at O'Brien. "There's air moving," he said. "Something behind it." O'Brien felt the hair on his arms lift, not from fear of spirits, fear of the simple fact that a person needs air. He raised his hand to knock. Louis Pacheco caught his sleeve hard. "Don't," he whispered. O'Brien turned. "Why not?" Louis's mouth worked before words came out. "Because if they hear, they change it tonight." That was the mansion's real power. It could change overnight. O'Brien stepped back and made a decision that wasn't about bravery. It was about timing. He couldn't smash the wall with 2 men and a deputy and hope the law would forgive it later. He needed a reason that couldn't be waved away as trespassing. So he went after the only thing that forces wealthy people to open doors: liability. He told Rourke to find code violations from the quake repairs: unsafe beams, unbraced chimneys, hidden structural damage, anything that could justify an official inspection with papers and witnesses. Rourke gave him one in under an hour. In the rear corridor, behind a linen closet, he found a staircase that ended at a ceiling. Not a quirky mystery feature. A stair built and then cut off, leaving a gap above the last step where the plaster had cracked. Rourke pointed at the crack like it was a wound. "If someone's been walking above this," he said, "it could drop. If someone falls, the county owns it." O'Brien smiled without humor. "Good," he said. "Now we have a reason to come back with a crowd." But before they left, the house gave them something they didn't ask for. A sound, soft at first, like someone dragging a broom. It came from inside the walls, behind the parlor section, slow and steady. Then 3 knocks. Rourke froze. Louis went pale. O'Brien stepped closer to the seam and spoke, low. "If someone can hear me, knock twice." Silence. Then 2 knocks, close together, too precise to be settling wood. O'Brien didn't hit the wall. He didn't shout. He did the only thing that mattered. He walked backward quietly, keeping his face calm, and told the deputy to get a warrant drafted immediately. Because now, if he waited and the sound stopped forever, he'd never forgive himself. That night, the mansion tried to outrun him. Louis Pacheco later swore he saw lanterns moving behind curtained windows after midnight. Not in the main rooms, deeper. The service side, men carrying boards, hammers working in a rhythm that didn't match repairs. One short burst, a pause, then another burst, like they were building around something, not building for comfort. At dawn, O'Brien returned with papers and 3 deputies. The front gate was locked tighter than before, and Franklin Vane, the senior houseman, met them with 2 men O'Brien hadn't seen in the household. Hard faces, clean collars, not staff, not friends. "This property is closed," Vane said. O'Brien showed the inspection order. Vane's eyes flicked down and back up. The men behind him didn't move. Then Sarah Winchester appeared at the end of the hallway in a dark dress that swallowed light. She didn't rush. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply looked past O'Brien, past the deputies, straight at Rourke, like she understood exactly what he was. "How long will your inspection take?" she asked. Rourke hesitated. "As long as it needs." Sarah nodded once. "Then do it," she said, and turned away, without another word. That should have been relief. It felt like a trap. They moved fast to the parlor wall. Rourke's fingers found the seam again, and his face tightened immediately. "Fresh," he said. "Fresh nails. Fresh filler." O'Brien leaned in. The odor of wet paint hit him. New paint, applied within hours, not days. The molding line had been adjusted. The tiny jump he'd seen yesterday was gone. "They moved it," Louis whispered behind them, voice shaking. "They moved it last night." Rourke tapped. The sound was different now. Not hollow, dense, packed, like they'd stuffed the space behind the wall with something to kill sound. O'Brien felt anger rise, hot and clean. "Open it," he said. Rourke looked at the order again, then at the wall, and made his choice. He pried the baseboard first. The nails squealed, fresh and stubborn. Behind the molding was not empty space. It was insulation, old rags, sawdust, and something darker mixed in, a cloth bundle. Rourke pulled it out with 2 fingers like it might bite. It wasn't a body part. It wasn't gore. It was worse in a quieter way. A folded work shirt, stiff with dried brown stains, and inside it, a leather pouch with coins and a small tin badge from a carpenter's hiring hall. Albert Voss. Proof he'd been here. Proof someone had handled his things. Proof someone wanted the wall to swallow them. And then Louis made a sound, half gasp, half sob, because as the baseboard came away, a thin stream of air breathed out from behind the wall, carrying a smell that didn't belong in a sealed space. Not rot, breath. O'Brien stared at the gap, and for a second, the mansion felt like it was holding its own breath with him, waiting to see if he'd do the obvious thing. He put his mouth close to the crack and said quietly, "If you're alive back there, make a sound." Nothing. Then a single scrape, faint but unmistakable, like fingernails dragging over wood. The first thing O'Brien did was stop everyone from talking. Not because he was scared of ghosts, because rich houses have ears, and rich families have people. If there really was someone behind that wall, one wrong shout could trigger the same thing you've already seen. Men with hammers arriving at midnight, and by morning the house pretending it never happened. Rourke widened the gap carefully, prying the molding away inch by inch. Behind it was a crude fill, rags, sawdust, old newspaper, whatever they could pack to kill sound. That alone told you this wasn't a design quirk. It was a mute button. O'Brien slid his hand into the narrow opening, felt raw wood, then something metal, a hinge. "A door," Rourke said, stunned. "They built a door and disguised it as wall." He pushed with his fingertips, and the panel shifted, not swinging wide, just giving a fraction, enough for stale air to leak out, enough for a faint, thin sound to escape. A cough, not settling wood, not a pipe. A human cough, weak and controlled, like the person making it was afraid of being heard. O'Brien looked at the deputies. "Now," he said, "hard." They hooked a pry bar into the seam and pulled. The panel gave with a cracking groan, plaster flaking off in a rain. When it finally swung open, it revealed a space that shouldn't have existed. Narrow, dusty, lined with boards, nailed hastily, like someone built a room in panic and then tried to forget it. There was no furniture, no lamp, just a mattress on the floor and a bucket. And on the mattress, curled on his side, eyes wide with shock, was a man. Not Albert Voss, older, thinner, face scraped by weeks of desperation. His beard had grown in patches, like he'd been pulling at it. His wrists were wrapped in cloth strips that looked like makeshift bandages, and his lips were cracked from dehydration. He stared at O'Brien as if O'Brien might be another trick. O'Brien crouched, voice low. "What's your name?" he asked. The man's throat worked. "Walter," he rasped. "Walter Healy." O'Brien blinked. That name wasn't in any hiring book he'd seen. Not a staff list, not a payroll. Walter tried to sit up and failed. One deputy stepped forward with a canteen. O'Brien stopped him with a hand. "Slow," he said. "If he's been drugged or starved, you don't shock the body." Rourke leaned in, scanning the room the way he scanned beams, looking for how it was made. He found the answer quickly. In the corner was a narrow vent shaft with a crude wooden flap. The flap had scrape marks, like someone had been opening it from the inside. The vent ran upward, probably into a service chase. That's how air got in. That's how sound got out. And that's how someone could listen. Louis Pacheco made a choking sound behind them. "That's not here," he whispered. "That wasn't there." "It was there," Rourke said, cold. "It was just hidden. O'Brien spoke again to Walter. "How long have you been in here?" Walter's eyes flicked toward the open panel, toward the bright room beyond, like he couldn't trust light anymore. "After the quake," he said. "They said I saw something I shouldn't." "What did you see?" O'Brien asked. Walter swallowed, shook his head once. "Not here," he whispered. "They're listening." O'Brien felt the anger rise again, but he kept his face neutral. "Who put you here?" he asked. Walter hesitated, then whispered a name, like it hurt to say. "Franklin Vane." The senior houseman. A deputy stepped out into the parlor to grab Vane immediately. O'Brien followed, and the mansion tried to turn the moment into confusion. Franklin Vane was gone. Not in the kitchen, not fetching Mrs. Winchester. Gone. The two hard-faced men were gone too. The front gate had been opened, and then shut again, like someone had slipped through during the commotion. Sarah Winchester appeared in the hallway, as if summoned by a bell only she could hear. Calm. Still. Eyes fixed on the damaged parlor wall. "You've broken my home," she said softly. O'Brien didn't yell. He didn't accuse her of murder. He held up the carpenter's tin badge they'd found in the cloth bundle and let it speak for him. "There was a man behind your wall," he said. "Alive." Sarah's face didn't change. If she felt horror, she swallowed it whole. "That's impossible," she replied. Rourke stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, it wasn't impossible. It was built." That's when Sarah finally did something human. Her gaze flicked, just once, toward the ceiling line above the parlor, toward the vent chase. Like she was calculating. O'Brien noticed it, and he realized something that made the case more complicated than a simple villain story. Either Sarah had ordered this, or someone inside her house had used her chaos and her money to build a private prison without her admitting it, maybe without her fully seeing it, because the mansion's constant construction made anything seem plausible. But in law, plausibility doesn't matter. Responsibility does. O'Brien ordered the house secured and sent a deputy to the telegraph office. He wanted county authorities, and he wanted them fast. Not tomorrow. Not after the mansion had another night. By late afternoon, a small crowd of officials arrived. County men, a doctor, and a photographer. The photographer took pictures of the disguised panel, the packed insulation, the mattress, the bucket. Proof that couldn't be talked away as stories. The doctor examined Walter Healy and asked the question that everyone was avoiding. "Why is he alive?" the doctor said quietly. "If someone wanted him gone, why keep him alive?" Walter answered that himself without realizing it. "They needed me to sign," he whispered. O'Brien leaned in. "Sign what?" Walter's eyes drifted closed, like the memory took energy. "Papers," he said. "I couldn't read them. They said it was for repairs. They said it was for the house. Then they said it was for trusts." Trusts. That word hit O'Brien like a clean punch, because it connected to the Winchester fortune without needing any supernatural nonsense. Trusts mean control. Trusts mean money, moving where it shouldn't. Trusts mean signatures that matter more than bones. Now the case had a shape. A missing worker after the quake. A sealed corridor. Night men paid in cash. A disguised prison behind a parlor wall. A man held alive to produce signatures. And the last piece was still missing. Why Walter Healy mattered enough to hide inside the scariest house in America. That answer was not in the parlor. It was in the one place in a mansion where paper survives, when people think no one will look. The office, the bookkeeping room, the locked drawers that only one person is supposed to touch. O'Brien turned to Sarah Winchester and said, "I need access to your records." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "You won't find what you think you'll find," she said. O'Brien didn't blink. "Then you shouldn't be afraid to open them." That night, under lamplight in the mansion's private office, Rourke and Mallory began sorting the ledgers: construction costs, wages, materials, cash withdrawals. The numbers didn't just tell a story, they built one. Because hidden in the normal entries, wood, nails, plaster, were payments that didn't belong. Payments to Dr. Silas Harlan, the same doctor's name from the locked air case. O'Brien felt his stomach drop. Either Harlan had connections everywhere, wealthy people needed secrets buried, or someone was using his name like a key. And as Mallory turned the page, he found a line item written in a different hand. Transfer complete. New identity provided. Keep him quiet until the deed is done. Mallory looked up at O'Brien, and for the first time all day, nobody spoke. Because now the house wasn't just scary, it was organized. Let me tell you what actually makes a house America's scariest in a real case file. Not legends, paper. Because walls can be rebuilt, floors can be replaced. But ledgers, if you find them before someone burns them, will confess without emotion. They worked in Sarah Winchester's private office under lamplight, the kind of room designed to look calm while fortunes move in silence. Mallory laid the books out by year, pre-quake, post-quake. Rourke separated construction costs from wages. O'Brien watched the numbers the way he watched faces. For the moment, they stopped matching the story. And the moment came fast. There were ordinary entries: lumber, plaster, nails, glass, hinges. Then there were the night entries, cash withdrawals in repeating amounts, always a day before new interior work appeared. No vendor names, no receipts, just initials. Then Mallory found a ledger page that had been pasted down. Someone literally glued a sheet over another sheet. He slid a thin blade under the corner and lifted it. Underneath was a set of payments that did not belong in a construction book at all. SH, consult. SH, sedation. SH, discretion. Dr. Silas Harlan again. O'Brien felt the same drop you felt earlier, because if you've been listening, that name has followed two different mansions like a shadow. It wasn't proof of a statewide conspiracy yet, but it was proof the same tool was being used: medicine as control, paperwork as a weapon. They kept turning pages, and then they found what Walter Healy had been forced to sign. A deed transfer draft, not a public filing, not yet, written carefully with blanks for signatures. It referenced a parcel adjacent to the Winchester property and a small bank account held under a name that didn't match Sarah's household at all. The name on the account was Walter R. Healy. He wasn't a random carpenter. He was the legal holder of something someone wanted to move quietly while the quake gave them cover. O'Brien stared at the paper, then at Walter's gaunt face in the doctor's room downstairs, and understood the purpose of the hidden wall. Walter wasn't being punished. He was being stored, kept alive, until he produced the one thing a fortune can't fake without risk: a clean signature. When O'Brien brought the document to Walter, the man's eyes filled with panic so sharp it looked like pain. "I never had land," Walter rasped. "I never had money." "Then why is your name here?" O'Brien asked. Walter shook his head, weak but insistent. "They told me," he whispered, "I would be someone else. They said I'd get a new name and disappear. They said it was mercy." Mercy. That word again, always used by people who want obedience. The doctor asked Walter if he recognized anyone. Walter's lips trembled. "Franklin," he said. "Franklin Vane, and the man with the bag." "The man with the bag," O'Brien repeated. Walter swallowed. "Dr. Harlan." So now the outline became brutal and simple. Franklin Vane used the quake chaos to make a worker vanish, then built a sealed corridor and a hidden chamber. He hid Walter Healy behind the parlor wall to force signatures and keep him from talking. And Dr. Harlan, whether as the same man or as a name being leveraged, provided sedation, discretion, and the medical language that turns imprisonment into care. O'Brien sent deputies to Providence at once. Not to Seaview this time, straight to Harlan's office address from the Ledger. They came back before sunrise with bad news. The office was empty. The sign had been removed. The drawers were cleaned out. Neighbors said a man fitting Harlan's description left late the previous evening with 2 trunks and a driver who didn't speak. Franklin Vane was harder. He'd vanished from the mansion the moment the wall was opened. And now, with the Ledger exposed, he wouldn't come back. So O'Brien did the next best thing. He locked down what he could still hold, Sarah Winchester's house. By March 25th, the property was crawling with county men. Photographs were taken. Statements were sworn. Walter Healy was moved under guard to a small medical ward in town, not an institution tied to private money. Sarah Winchester was questioned for hours. And here's where the case becomes darker than any ghost tour, because the file doesn't give you a clean villain with a knife. It gives you a wealthy woman in a house that never stopped changing. And it gives you this question: did she order it, or did her power make it possible? Sarah's answers were measured. She admitted the quake had forced her to close sections of the house. She admitted she paid night crews in cash. She denied knowledge of any hidden chamber. She denied knowing Walter Healy. She said she relied on Franklin Vane to manage staff and repairs, which might have sounded believable, until Mallory found the one thing that breaks "I didn't know." A small personal notebook in the desk drawer, not a ledger, Sarah's own hand. It wasn't a confession. It was a reminder list. And in the middle of it, written alongside mundane tasks like deliveries and appointments, was a line that made O'Brien go still. "Parlor, do not open. Ask FV when resolved. FV, Franklin Vane." She might not have built the wall herself, but she knew there was something behind it that needed to be resolved, and she left it there anyway. When O'Brien read that line aloud in the presence of the county attorney, Sarah's face went pale for the first time. Not guilty panic, something colder, calculation failing. Because once that notebook existed in evidence, the house stopped being a mystery and became a place with a documented, deliberate concealment. The county moved to seize records and pursue Vane. A warrant was drafted. Telegraphs went out to train stations and ports. And then the mansion did what it always did in this story: changed the stakes at the worst possible moment. Walter Healy died the next morning. Not from a beating, not from a dramatic poisoning in front of witnesses. He died the way controlled people die when they've been kept too long on sedatives and too little food. His heart simply didn't have enough left. The doctor wrote exhaustion and complications in the chart. O'Brien didn't accept that as an ending. He leaned over Walter's bed while the man's skin cooled and asked him softly the only question that still mattered: where did Franklin go? Walter's eyelids fluttered. His mouth opened. A breath came out thin as paper. "Boat," he whispered. "Oakland. Night." And then he was gone. They never caught Franklin Vane in the way people want villains caught. A man like that doesn't stand under a courthouse clock waiting for handcuffs. The best they could do was chase his trail through receipts and train timetables until it disappeared at the waterline. Sarah Winchester didn't go to prison either. The Winchester name was too heavy, the proof too tangled, the era too forgiving to the powerful. But something did happen that no ghost story can match. The mansion became a monument to concealment, not because spirits wandered the halls, because real men had, carrying boards at midnight to make a living person vanish behind a wall. And the scariest part isn't the maze. It's the fact that if O'Brien hadn't noticed a molding line that didn't align, Walter Healy would have died in silence inside one of the most famous houses in America, and the world would have called it eccentricity. If you watched the video to the end, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this: do you think Sarah Winchester was an innocent woman surrounded by predators? Or was she the kind of powerful person who let a human being rot behind her wall because it was easier than letting her name take a hit?